Hi, I'm Stephan Durst, and you're watching Say Can You S.E.E., the nationally syndicated live call-in show of the Society for Economic Equality. Over the past 3 years, the Society for Economic Equality has been giving the lie to the propaganda spewing from the mainstream media from our home base in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Tonight we come to you live from Holland. Let me here welcome our new affiliates in Ann Arbor, Pontiac, Madison, Wisconsin, Peoria, Illinois, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. In a recent program, we exposed the illusion of choice in the labor market and the false choices offered us by the so-called democratic process. Tonight, we uncover another insidious lie, that the business elite take all the risks in creating our wonderful material culture, and so are justified in taking prodigious profits from this process. Let's just begin by looking at a few areas in which private profits are provided by, insured or assured by the public larder. Private profit at public expense. Federally funded research for drugs and other things is licensed to corporations. The government pays for the research. The licenses are given to corporations, and the products are then marketed. Potentially life-saving drugs are withheld from people who cannot pay, even though they may have already paid for the development of the drugs. Federal grants are given to corporations to advertise their products in foreign countries. Tax abatements for businesses, deductible business expenses, infrastructures designed to profit the elites. We recently did a program on how the automobile industry destroyed the passenger rail system and created the national highway system at public expense to their benefit. Schools, the public pays for schools, but corporations get a highly indoctrinated work class who are used to punching clocks and not asking too many questions. Police and military at public expense to preserve private property. And at this point, 1%, the top 1% of families in this country control as much wealth as the lower 95%. The bailouts of Chrysler, the bailout of Mexico, the bailout of the S&L, the bailout of Asia, public funds going to bail out Wall Street investors and currency speculators, giveaways of federal lands for mining and logging, government contracts, prison, labor, military contracts, infrastructure contracts, the Federal Reserve's use of interest rates to protect property rights against rising wages. Can anybody else think of any comments concerning?
Well, in terms of capital flight, when an American company is maybe considering moving offshore, the federal government is already there, ready to subsidize them, even carries advertisements in business journals declaring that there's money available for you to transfer your production operation offshore. I mean, this is
Standard
strange
practice.
Example.
Frank?
Well, I was thinking of the past, certainly nuclear power, and the present also,
Yes,
actually.
nuclear
So
power.
nuclear power has been
subsidized.
subsidized by the federal government for a long time.
Tobacco growers?
Yeah, in fact, it's what made it so profitable was that the government subsidized the mining of uranium and also the research and that sort of thing. Agriculture, certainly.
Agricultural subsidies?
Yeah, tobacco subsidies.
Well, you know, in terms of agricultural subsidies, though, those have been shot down in the Congress, though. But it's, you know, the people who could hold out, you know, the larger operations actually benefit from the people who are now failing because the subsidies that were around for 50 years
Well,
are suddenly gone.
The recent Farm Bill, what it stipulated was that over the next 7 years, and this was 3 years ago that it passed, farm subsidies would be phased out. And during that 7 years, progressively, year by year, the larger producers, so Cargill, Arthur Daniels Midland, would get a higher and higher percentage of those subsidies, and the smaller producers, your grandfather or whatever, would get less.
One of the best examples was during World War II, when the very patriotic corporations required a 10% profit subsidy, definite 10% guaranteed profit, while they drafted young men from the working class to go for $30 and $50 a month and fight the war. I
And
think
you were one of those,
the
weren't you?
perfect way of capitalism works and a class-divided society operates.
Katie? No? Have we made our point? Let's get on to this proposed Medicare buy-in. As I understand it, it's going to be a subsidy for the top 10%. If you haven't heard about it, Clinton is proposing now that we permit people from the age of 62 or even as young as 55 to buy into Medicare insurance. However, the buy-in would only be possible statistically for the top 10% of the population.
Who could afford to pay $500 a month into this?
Right. And so who could afford probably to buy private insurance anyway. So
Yeah, we're talking about organ transplant insurance.
Right.
Essentially, which is for the elites here.
So now the taxpayer will be subsidizing the rich people's medical expenses. How about the proposed Asian bailout? We all know about this. $60 billion going to the government of Indonesia. Do you know who runs the government of Indonesia? A man named Suharto, whose personal wealth is $16 billion, whose family's wealth is $30 billion. And these are in real dollars. These aren't in his mamsy-pamsy national currency that they pay their workers in either.
These aren't rupees.
His 50 closest allies are worth altogether $30 billion. So just when Suharto and his friends get together, there's $60 billion, but that money's coming from the IMF, which is again going to be refinanced by U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Well, another 60 billion is going to South Korea, and it's interesting to note what you just did on Indonesia, in that, what's often being cited in our own media in this country about the reason that there was this meltdown was corruption. So it's, corruption among the elites is considered one of the reasons for this thing to take place. And it's kind of like our own SNL bailout. You see the wealthiest people who perhaps benefited from a corrupt sort of buddy system actually being the people who then get bailed out for taking bad risks.
Much like the SNL. Frank?
Yeah, another point that might be made is that apparently from an article that I read recently, there's a law that would logically, you would think, prevent a bailout of any kind of Indonesia, because Suharto has the proclivities of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. This is a bad guy.
That's why the CIA and the military would Kissinger put him there in the first place.
We put him there.
Well, the United States
I had nothing to do with it. I was still in diapers when it happened.
We didn't do it,
And he's been there that length of time in order to accumulate that kind of power and wealth. And what we look at is what looked like a growing economy of a lot of people making cheap goods, and some investors profiting, as well as the ruling elite in that country.
Yeah, well, in short, then, what we have is the United States taxpayers and other Western taxpayers through the IMF subsidizing the bailout of the wealthy in developing countries. And then the social costs of cuts in wages, cuts in social services being borne by the citizens of those countries.
And of this country, yes. The IMF,
Certainly.
the IMF is insisting that there be conditions with these loans and bailouts, and those are lower wages, more anti-union activities.
And significantly,
Frank?
the Prime Minister of Malaysia is resisting, because he apparently has the best interests of his citizens in mind, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with the IMF policies because of the social damage.
Well, if that's true, his days are numbered, I
Probably,
suspect.
yeah.
One of the interesting things is that a part of any IMF bailout requires the end of or a decline in subsidizing food. Now, in an awful lot of third world countries, the grain, the minimal kinds of foods are subsidized. And so when the IMF bails you out, it's the end of subsidies, and or at least the price of food rises, and so poor people, the people who live on rice and cornmeal and things like that, very staple things, start going hungry.
Yeah, invariably in all these countries, the structural adjustment demanded by the World Bank and the IMF demands really, like it's been said, a real decline in the standard of living for most people, an end to your right to, well,
To live.
real right to work laws that, protect unionism, laws that protect your job like they had in South Korea until very recently with this crisis. But, we're saying that we're giving, or that the U.S. government and the IMF, the World Bank, and other Western nations are giving these huge sums of money to the governments, but really, as Stephen said in a conversation that we had, really what's going on is that the ruling elites of the world are being bailed out of their bad investments.
Right.
Their bad risks are being socialized, while at the same time, of course, any profits that they get are completely privatized.
Yeah, the Mexican bailout wasn't a bailout of the Mexican people.
No,
the
they were-
Mexican government. It was a bailout of the people who had put in finance.
Wall
into the-
Street
Wall
investors.
Street. Wall Street
Mexican
investors.
bonds.
Mexican elite.
Right,
And
and
so is this.
And
And so was
that's
it.
why, we're wondering if things are going so well in Mexico, why are there so many people coming to the U.S. why do they continue to come here? Because it is a matter of survival, because millions of people have been put out of work in Mexico.
And not to mention the two ongoing revolts in Mexico. People who are happy, satisfied, content don't tend to take up arms.
Yeah, I've always thought it interesting that NAFTA made it so much easier for capital to cross the border, but we're building a wall so that labor can't cross. I mean, we've got
Well,
free...
that's not for real. I mean, they build a wall, they build a fence that's maybe 5-10 miles.
Yeah, and they've got
Long.
helicopters shooting at people.
Yeah, but it's only at specific points. Really, the elites who need that labor in the United States, they really want to make sure that it gets in. But at the same time, the federal government wants to make a show of controlling
A show of
illegal
shooting.
immigration, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not real.
But the people are getting killed.
People get hurt.
Well,
and
we
But
would
in
like
the
the
aggregate-
People get
strong,
arrested,
tough
but they
ones
also
to get in here,
Oh,
right?
yeah, right. The
It's kind of
Darwinian
like-
winners.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
The
who
survival of
can
the best
cross the
workers
trackless
get
desert,
across, right?
Frank.
Well, I didn't really make my point about, but apparently there's a law in the books in the United States that makes it illegal for the United States to bail out or to subsidize a country that has a kind of a record in labor and in oppression of
Human rights
minority
violations.
peoples and things like that, that Suharto's Indonesia has. And this is simply being ignored. I think it was passed in 1994 or something?
1994,
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders, a congressman from Vermont, had a press conference recently and said that it was his strong opinion and the opinion of a number of other knowledgeable people that U.S. participation in this bailout, the Asian bailout, is illegal as a direct result of a law that Barney Frank of Massachusetts and I passed in 1994 as members of the Subcommittee on International Financial Organizations. In short, that law states that the United States government cannot support any international monetary fund or World Bank loans to any country unless the loan proposals guarantee internationally recognized worker rights. Far from that, these IMF loans are attacking workers' rights and social spending in these countries. It's another form of economic restructuring.
Or just one more sort of pathetic note. In South Korea, the government called for citizens to contribute their jewelry and that sort of thing to help bail out the situation. And so you have a situation where I'm sure the wealthiest aren't emptying their jewelry boxes, but you have, women giving up their rings and their necklaces and stuff to bail out the banks that engaged in the cronyism that they're accused of. And it's working. People are actually bringing in their jewelry.
Well, it's really seems unconscionable to me that the people of the United States, which as taxpayers are really largely behind the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, are being asked to fork over this money to people who took financial risks and lost. At the same time that the social welfare state in the United States is being dismantled, destroyed. People are being thrown off of food stamps. People are actually being totally cut off of welfare. Children are being thrown out of the social welfare state. The whole thing is being phased out in 3 or 4 years. And this is just a bizarre situation.
And we're supposed to be in a boom time thing, economy, and yet I happen to work in a shelter, volunteer in a shelter, and I also work with some street homeless people, other homeless people, and there are just more and more people, and almost all of them are working at very low-paying jobs that don't allow them often to have a home.
Yeah, well, there's this phrase, too big to fail, and then that combined with the phrase, which is a definition of capitalism, creative destruction. So I guess the creative destruction is the allowing people to starve, allowing people to feel pressed to the wall, so that there's a great deal of tension in families and culture. Yeah, austerity measures. That's right.
It sounds like kind of religious, like
right.
It's good for your soul.
Right. It
might mean starving to death.
It might mean starving to death.
Well, they call that belt
means
tightening measures.
Yeah,
belt tightening measures. But the interesting thing is that those who are already obscenely rich are not allowed to become not rich. This seems to be the thing beyond consideration.
Well, that whole playing by the rules thing that Clinton and all these other congressional people are always telling us, blah blah blah, and play by the rules, But the thing is that playing by the rules isn't something that really ever occurs to the ruling elites themselves.
That's true.
They're there because they didn't play by the rules.
Well, yeah, the rulers make
They've
the
made
rules.
the
They make
That's
the
right. The golden
The
rule.
ruling
Those
class
are the
makes the
rules.
rules.
Make the rules, right?
There you have it.
The golden rule, now in new paper money.
Yeah. that's
Coming to
Well-
you soon in electronic money.
He who has the gold rules.
So private profit at public expense, this is what I call a Marxism for the rich. And so I turn to the New Yorker magazine, and what do I see? Karl Marx is being hailed as the next great capitalist thinker. The author, John Cassidy, is talking about an old school chum of his from Oxford days doing well on Wall Street now. And he says, to my surprise, he brought up Karl Marx and said, the longer I spend on Wall Street, the more convinced I am that Karl Marx was right. I assumed he was joking. The Wall Street broker went on, there is a Nobel Prize waiting for the economist who resurrects Marx and puts it all together in a coherent model. He continued quite seriously. I am absolutely convinced, said the stockbroker, that Marx's approach is the best way to look at capitalism. The rest of the article in the New Yorker goes on to discuss various concepts and observations that Marx made about capitalism that have been appropriated by famous capitalist economists and taken out of context and shown not in the context of a critique of capitalism, but as natural laws. For instance, Marx talked about unemployment, armies of the unemployed keeping down wages. So the Chicago School of economists like Milton Friedman, and didn't he get a Nobel Prize, come up with this concept of the natural rate of unemployment. Well, how do you get a natural rate of unemployment? You have the government give the Federal Reserve the power to change interest rates when wages rise too high, throw people out of work, bring down wages. This makes the ruling class happy. This is one example of observations that Marx had that the ruling class is using as weapons in their class war. Frank?
Well, you know, Marx talked about the effect of this reserve army of the unemployed, and his point always was that it was in the interest of the capitalists to have a large number of unemployed people because it kept wages down.
Right.
And this is not news to most of us, because if we know that standing outside of the shop are hundreds of people who want your job, or in the making applications for teaching positions or whatever it is, well, you're going to be a little leery about going on strike or making a lot of waves. And in fact, one of the things that we've noticed, that all of us have noticed, is the ability of capital in recent years to simply replace striking workers. Take a look at the newspaper strike in Detroit, or various a school teacher strike in, this doesn't happen in education very often because the MEA is really leery about going on strike now. But there was a case where it happened not all that long ago, and in Grand Rapids they did it, didn't they? They replaced striking workers, or was it East Grand Rapids? I can't remember which. But you know, this is something that goes on all the time, and we're all leery about asking for more money, and that's the reason that wages have been pretty much steady. There's been very little rise in wages because they've got us scared as a class.
Right. And
yes, really, really frightened and feeling that it's somehow you will bring the criticism of the whole society upon you for disrupting the society, hurting children or whatever, if you do organize to go on strike, because you are getting an adequate wage and you are working and you are so lucky to live in this society. And so there is just a kind of mode of thinking that's pervasive in the society and in education that says that it's wrong to think in those terms.
To criticize, to engage in analytical thought. And then not only is there an army of workers ready to take your job here in the States, there's always the imminent possibility of those jobs being shipped overseas.
Globalization.
Globalization is
Globalization
yes.
was another insight of Marx's that the capitalist class has been using.
Not to mention the recent changes in prison labor law, where for a long time it was against the law to use prison labor precisely because it would undercut the free labor or the person.
And in this area, the office furniture business, in Grand Rapids, Zeeland, Holland area. One of the things that prisoners very often were involved in was the making of furniture for the state of Michigan, and for I don't know, maybe for other counties.
But these are things on the open markets now. Now it's
privatized prisons.
It's privatized prison labor is the big growing labor market in the United States, and I mean it's your maquiladora within the United States, right at the core of national and international markets. So slave labor really is back. It was banned in the 30s because it was really something that competed very unfairly with labor. So labor reform legislation kicked it out, but in the early 90s, it came back, and it's on the horizon. It's something very frightening.
And then the beauty of the system, or the more accurately, the ugliness of the system, is that well, then you create a situation where, well, since it's being produced in the prison, whatever product it is, people on the outside don't have the job. So the unemployment contributes to a rise in crime, so more people get put in prison, and so you get a growing sector of people being employed in prison. I mean, it feeds itself, you know, and pretty soon
Misery
they'll just
leads to crime, leads to more
and we
prisoners.
need
more prisoners, which means not
More
having to pay
profits.
them anything, more
We
profits.
need the privatization then of education, according to that view, so that we don't even think of criticizing a system like that, where we're just we believe that that's the way things should go. That private enterprise always can do a better job than the people or the public. That it's always more efficient and always works better and it's always cheaper. And we're taught to believe that, and that's why kids are seeing McDonald's advertisements in the classroom on TV.
So
Oh yeah,
we're,
that's channel.
I know.
Channel 1,
Yeah.
right?
We've done.
Well, they're also
we've
putting
done.
McDonald's in schools in place of the
Sure,
traditional cafeteria.
sure.
We've done programs on this. We've done programs on prison labor. Our telephone number is 392-1060.
And we have one on the line right now.
We have a caller. Oh, thank you. I didn't understand what that
Are you
signal
guys talking about people being in prison or behind the wall?
meant. Sometimes.
How come they don't let them out early, like an early parole or something? You know what I'm saying? Instead of making them wait for like ever. Because I've been hearing about in the newspaper that all these prisons in Michigan are like overcrowded with inmates, and they don't know where to put everybody anymore.
Excuse me. What's your name?
Julie.
Julie. That's not really the topic of this program. If you'd like to call back later after you have a better idea of what
But
we're
could I
talking
make
about.
a real
Sure.
quick answer?
But thank you
I think
anyway.
it's real useful. I think it does fit in a bit. It fits because our emphasis should be then on building more prisons, because we can do these kinds of things like have more labor. And politicians also look really, really good because they're making society safe. And they're punishing people. And that looks really good for them because that's the way we view it. We don't look at trying to rehabilitate people or put them back into productive labor because they're doing something kind of productive supposedly in prison. And we're building more and more prisons. And so people are kept within prisons, and it serves a lot of functions for society.
How about people who are ready to come out, you know, and they're like only like down to 5 months or 4 months? How come they can't just get out early instead of waiting the whole 5 months? You know what I'm saying?
Because that wouldn't, people would say, oh, that's not right, they got to be punished.
Yeah, that's the big trend, of course, is for
'Cause I had
truth
I
in
was reading-
sentencing, they call it.
I was reading it in the newspaper that there's
we're
some
really
black
off
inmates
the
go home
subject, aren't we?
early, you know, on an early parole.
Julie, this really isn't the topic. When we have to go to an anti-commercial now, what we're discussing is
Thanks a lot for
how
calling.
Thank you.
how private profit is provided and insured at public expense, and how capitalist economists use Marxist theory as weapons in the class war. We'll be taking more phone calls, hopefully more informed phone calls, after these anti-commercial messages.
Thank you, Julie.
2 minutes and 50 seconds.
All right.
I was going
Is there
to
anything
say
we can do
that
about
we should
us
talk
sounding
about,
like in a buck, like we're in a bucket?
The reality of the economist's
The
career.
sound here on the
And,
stage
the
a few times it sounded
generating
like
of economic
we were inside of a bucket.
um,
I mean,
according to
can
where
they
the
make
money comes
that
from.
not happening?
time a new cancer patient is diagnosed, the GNP goes up. If we are to save ourselves, economists must learn to subtract. Our economy is in trouble. Our education system is failing. Our cities have become war zones. And our planet is in distress. But instead of reaching out for solutions, we reach for another potato chip and zap another channel. Snap out of it, America. A message from the Media Foundation.
Doesn't have a career unless he's into this.
Good, well said. That's why you're so convinced about taxation.
Welcome back to Say Can You S.E.E., the nationally syndicated call-in show of the Society for Economic Equality. Tonight we're discussing private profit at public risk. Mark would like to make a comment concerning the reality of an economist's career track. And that reality is?
Well, basically, there's a style in among economists, especially the Chicago school that Stephen was mentioning, that's in vogue. It's in vogue with the think tanks, with the ruling elites, the people who contribute large sums of money to universities, to foundations. Really, if you're an economist, you can't really be concerned with the truth if what you want is a career where you make some money and you make a living and you can get by, raise a family, have a professional career. If you're into talking about the sorts of things that those of us here on this panel are concerned with, essentially that's suicide for your career if you're an economist. And this is the reality of an economist's career, and it's the reality of a person in the news media's career. This is why you don't hear this sort of thing on the news media. Wealth determines the truth. Unfortunately, it's not the real truth, and if society ignores the real truth in favor of the money-generated truth, it's likely to end up with the sort of disaster that we see all around us in the environment, in the fact that the standard of living for most Americans has been declining since 1973. Even though the economy is booming for the upper 20% of the economy, especially for the upper 1% of the population that controls 95% of all the wealth in the country, really there's nothing on the horizon that's going to change this whole direction that we see right now because of this reality. Anyway.
Mark, I'd like to correct a statistic. The top 1% owns as much wealth as the bottom 95%, but they only own half of all the wealth. The top 10% owns 75% of the wealth. We'll be getting to a caller in a minute, but first I would like to, I've made a list of 20 insights that Marx had that have been appropriated without attribution by capitalist economists. Marx foresaw downsizing in his theory of accumulation. Charles Handy is the great new business guru that we often talk about on here, and he advises corporations to get rid of half their workforce, make them work twice as hard, and get 3 times the profits. He practically lifted that right out of Marx, but he makes it sound like it's a good idea, whereas in the context of Marx's whole critique, this is not natural law. This is what results from the worldview of the bourgeoisie. This is an economics for the rich. This is Marxism for the rich. Todd, you're on Say Can You S.E.E., if you're still there.
Hi, yes, I'm still there. I'd just like to thank you guys for what you're doing, because you're educating the public, who is very uneducated when it comes to issues like this. Myself, I'm a minority, and the minorities, we look at it as always a conspiracy, that the government is up to this, that the rich has put the government up to this. And from listening to you guys, I see a lot of our theories that people say we pretend about these conspiracy are true. Now, what I would like to ask you guys, what do you do to educate the mass public of this Marxism that is being used against them?
Well, this show is
Every means necessary.
I'd like to suggest that Todd get in touch with us and give us a hand. And anybody else out there, there's a telephone number and there's an address, and we'd be glad to send you literature that tells about our group. And it's a wide open group with in the sense of a wide variety of ideas and opportunity to take part in discussions, and also an opportunity to help educate our class. We're not going to emancipate the emancipation of our class has to be our own job. We have to do it ourselves, and that involves education.
You should give him that phone number in case our address doesn't
well,
appear
all right.
at the end of
in
the
Grand
show.
Rapids, this Grand Rapids phone number?
Yes.
All right, in Grand Rapids, 616, of course,
616
453-0305. And we have a post office box, 1564, Grand Rapids, 49501. That'd be S-E-E, post office box in 1564, Grand Rapids.
Something that would be really interesting to notice that historically when like the American Indian movement and the Black Panthers made an attempt to educate the public about what's going on, they were targeted and violently repressed. And I think that everybody up here on the panel, it has at least the advantage of being Caucasian. It's not as easy to butcher us, but I think that bringing to awareness of the history, for instance, of the Black Panthers, what Malcolm X was saying, what Martin Luther King was saying, especially at right before his murder, bringing that home to the young people today is really, really important.
Frank.
Well, you know, I really hate to hear the Black Panthers and the American Indian movement mentioned in connection with the sea at all, because one of the problems with both of those movements is whether or not they advocated violence, they sure as hell looked like it. You know, waving guns and the whole bit. And
Well,
they were cornered, Frank.
And it's asking for trouble.
Well,
Sounds a little like the American Revolution, doesn't it,
what was that,
Frank?
Todd?
It sounds a little bit like the American Revolution, doesn't it, Frank?
Yeah, that's
I'd like
right.
to see an American
And-
Revolution,
and-
but I'll
and-
tell you, I think that we have a Constitution and a Bill of Rights and that sort of thing in this country that, in effect, legalizes revolution if we care to take legal methods. And that method involves convincing the majority of people that it's time to get rid of this insane economic system that impoverishes the great majority of us. We've got to do it.
That's true, Frank, but I think it's hard to say that from the perspective that we're in. When you're being pushed really hard, and we're talking about movements that sprung up as a result of already being violently attacked.
You're right about
Indians
that.
having undergone genocide, the black population having endured, first of all, slavery, and then you know, the whole lynching era and all that, that they turned to you know, by any means necessary.
But
I
it
don't
was
think it's
suicidal.
surprising.
That's a point I'd like to make.
I think that depending on where
Suicidal.
you are in society, for instance, the people in Chiapas, the Zapatista movement down there, that they turned to an armed struggle at the point that they did, can't be criticized. I don't think that we can sit here and criticize that. This was their only alternative. And the fact that we are able to struggle nonviolently here on the TV or wherever is great, and that's what we should be doing. But I don't think we can sit here and take a high and mighty tone.
Well, this is
Well, I don't think we should
But-
take that attitude either, but I'll tell you, looking it back, it was suicidal for the American Indian movement, for the Black Panthers, and right now in Chiapas
But
for
their
the
analysis was
Zapatistas.
correct.
How many, you know, what's going on there now?
I'm not convinced that it's suicidal.
I don't think so
Zapatistas.
either. I
It
think
may be suicidal not to.
I'd like to hear what
I
Kate has.
I agree,
disagree.
because-
Kate's in education. She can perhaps address
Well,
your
I
question best, Todd.
I think that, well, just looking at, and Mexico, I think that it's really important because that is getting world attention, and people are focusing on what are the conditions in Mexico that are leading to this sustained long rebellion, and it has not been really violent on the part of the Zapatistas. But it has a huge amount of support, not just within Mexico, but throughout the world. And because lots of people recognize that people finally at least have to speak out, have to at least they sometimes put themselves in a lot of danger in order to get their word out. And maybe that is what's going to be happening, is that sometimes we have to take at least some dangerous steps to put ourselves in, and that's a kind of thing that Martin Luther King did. I mean, sometimes in order to get the word out, you do have to put yourself in a position of danger, and maybe even your job, and maybe even sometimes your family.
You know, the thing that bothers me, though, the people who are put in danger, some 47 women and children. I think you know, if it were the Zapatista high command or whatever, it'd be one thing. But that they weren't the ones in danger.
But that's not how terrorists...
They come in.
Yeah.
They come in and do that to people,
Yeah.
even when there isn't an armed rebellion
Well,
going on.
maybe so.
And remember, those were unarmed people, too, who were attacked by a death squad. We're, of course, talking about the recent massacre in Mexico against Zapatista supporters. I guess Todd is gone.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, okay.
I wanted to give you guys two names of some authors that I have been reading who have a lot of good ideas that will really help you to get this out to, like, the population that really needs to hear what you guys are saying is the Caucasian population, because they have the more voting power, the majority numbers. They're the ones that can make a congressman do his job and see that we're all joined at the hip, and that if we go down, eventually, you know, the working class man, he'll go down too. If the minorities constantly get discriminated against, treated bad in the courts, you know, we can't get you go to court and they give
divided against each other in
right
order to maintain that control. So
right.
Who are these authors?
Excuse me?
The authors.
Names?
Oh, they're Tony Brown.
Tony Brown.
Tony Brown is an old friend of mine.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Of course.
And
The great Tony Brown.
Travis Smiley just wrote a book that just came out, and it's really enlightening, and it may give you guys some ideas to help educate the masses.
On a previous show, Todd, we discussed a book by Noel Ignatiev. Have you ever heard of him?
No, I haven't.
Ignatiev. The book was called How the Irish Became White. He also publishes a journal called Race Trader. His theory is that race in this country has been used to divide the working class, to bring part of the working class in to suppress another part of the working class, and that this is used to keep the ruling class on top. And his theory is that if white people will refuse the benefits that they derive from a racist system and join in solidarity with minorities, that the ruling class will not be able to tell who their friends are and who their enemies are, and this will cause them to crumble under their own contradictions. It's an interesting idea. We'll have to see what happens, folks.
I think I have another favorite person right at the, and that's Cornel West, and he's going to be talking, I think tomorrow on U of M station at 1 o'clock, I think.
And if you contact us at that number or that address, and Frank gets in touch with me about a return address, we could send several of our shows on one tape to you that you'd probably be quite interested in, that goes along with what you've been saying.
Thank you for your call, Tony. Anything else?
Todd.
Todd, right. Tony Brown. Todd. We're discussing private profit, public risk. I've hardly gotten to any of these ideas of Marx that the capitalists have appropriated. I have a whole bunch of them. But I would like to move on to the things in this article that Marx mentions that are left out of the article. The article does not talk about the labor theory of value. Well, it mentions it and dismisses it and says, well, nobody cares about that anymore, let's move on to the next thing. The labor theory of value is very important, and there's no way that the capitalist can appropriate it because...
Well, because, first of all, it explains just what capitalism is. I can't imagine capitalists adopting Marxism, because what Marx is saying, in effect, is that capitalism is a system of robbery. Some of the old socialist parties used to call capitalism the greatest robbery in history. And the labor theory of value, which you mentioned, and is simply an explanation of the fact that all value comes from human labor. What else? But the author of this article simply chooses to ignore that or to downplay it or whatever and say it isn't true and then get into some hogwash. I have no trouble.
It's just the siphoning off of that excess value and appropriating it for private ends.
What this author from the
public.
New Yorker of October magazine, what he says, this guy John Cassidy, in his article, The Return of Karl Marx, the Next Thinker, is that the things that capitalists should like about Karl Marx are the dialectic of history, that there's a struggle between the classes, and that's a reality, and in order to win that struggle, to keep on top, the capitalist needs to perpetuate misery, poverty, a large army of the unemployed, so that wages are kept down, and as this author spins it, so that inflation is kept down, et cetera, et cetera. This is the beauty of Marx, is just that there's the recognition that there's a conflict and you need misery and unemployment and poverty for capitalism to work. That's all he essentially is saying, really.
Right.
Other than, well, give up on that surplus value of labor thing because the math doesn't work out, and then he just drops it.
Well, profit is the surplus value of labor siphoned off.
The thing he seems to want to appropriate is the materialist conception of history.
Right.
But what this really involves is the kind of historical process that Marx saw, in which the beginnings of agriculture meant the end of the old system of what we call primitive socialism or primitive communism, and the beginning of class-divided society. And the wage slavery of capitalism is the latest of the different slaveries, where a ruling class formed, wealth was created and a ruling class formed, and then the first of these systems was slavery, which lasted through to about the collapse of the Roman Empire. Then you had a new system of exploitation of people, the feudal system. And then the last one, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the wage slavery that we're experiencing now, where the robbery has taken place through the wages system. Under slavery, they just took everything they could except the bare necessity for life and just appropriated it. The same thing under feudalism, and the same thing under this system. Sure. It's a system by which capital and the rich exploit wages.
Well, I mean,
so that's kind of funny that he'd want to appropriate this idea,
Yeah, Leo Tolstoy said much the same thing when he was analyzing the American
Distorted,
Civil War,
maybe would be better.
and he said that the North understood something that the South did not. That meaning the North elites understood that the South elites did not understand, and that is that no form of slavery is abandoned until a new one is developed to take its place. Which is what you said.
Of course, of course, when you're a slave or a wage slave, when you're working all the time, you're close to the edge, you're burned out, you really don't have the time to inform yourself, educate yourself, become a eclectic, reader and a person thinking about, well, another system, maybe revolution. I mean, this is to the advantage of the ruling elites too,
Keep
is
us off
the
balance.
burnout factor.
Yeah.
Keeps people under control and keeps people ignorant of the real conditions too.
And then for middle-class people, it's greed and trying to maintain their place.
Well, and much the same thing applies though too, in
Very
terms of
much.
understanding
Very
the
much.
situation.
And
Yeah.
another thing is the mean world syndrome that middle class gets from their television set. Well, we can't go outside because it's a mean world out there.
Oh,
And there are a
I
lot
think
of poor
it's
people
there.
who are
They
enemy.
want what I have, and if I don't keep my pace up and keep accumulating, I might slip down into that mean world in the mean
Right.
streets. Yeah.
Well, I think
Instead of being able to move to my walled-off community with an electric fence
Right.
and guards and dogs.
A book we've discussed on this program before I think needs mentioning here. It's called The Rich Get Richer, The Poor Get Prisoned by Jeffrey Ryman, and he shows statistics from the FBI showing that most of the murder and robbery in this country is actually done by people in the top echelons of economic power, not the people who are totally deprived.
And
Well, it's not, it's
they're
like,
invariably not punished.
that's like, say, a billionaire, like, you know, some of those we have around the Grand Rapids area, who are able to contribute to
The
something
boss?
like the American Democracy Foundation, you know, which actually ends up funding death squads throughout Central America, for instance.
That makes him a murderer.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that
The
they're going to
FBI
go to
didn't
prison
count
for it.
that. Even the things that the FBI counts.
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that the ruling class has always define law, make laws and define crime. What is criminal is what the ruling class, the capitalist class in our society, decides is criminal.
Yeah, well, government is violence.
Yeah. Right.
Well, I think that an interesting thing to try to bring this back is this mean world you were talking about. And people, I think, have accepted the idea that nature, red in tooth and claw, competition is the reality of economics. The first aspect of why this is not true is that the ruling class, the people at the very top of this system, don't really compete against each other. They give each other a handout, a hand up. They manipulate the government in order to externalize their corporate costs and internalize their profits and all these things that we've been discussing.
They're
and
allowed
then
to have
also
community.
right, they're allowed to have community.
Oh, boy.
And then the other aspect is the fact that it's not through competition that goods and services are produced, but through cooperation. You have a bunch of people who go to a factory or work in a restaurant or whatever, and they don't punch each other in the nose in order to get to
May I
the
take your
machine
order?
first, and they cooperate. And so the basic principle of economic production is cooperation. And the social Darwinism that was used to justify this, the new theories within the field of evolution have even started to talk about the predominance of cooperation rather than competition, even in that field.
Yeah, I do think that we are succeeding, and not we, but I think that those in power are succeeding, though, through all of this social Darwinianism in destroying the community and destroying society.
Part of it is an emphasis on our individual rights, which works out, I think, for a lot of people in our society for this real serious issue of whether or not you can be forced to wear a helmet on a motorcycle. And so
Trivializing important things. This is typical.
yes, but it becomes terribly important to people who feel they don't have very much control in other parts of their life, and then they kind of focus on those aspects of the government that, like do some kind of safety things as taking away their freedoms, when in reality, huge amounts of their freedom have been already taken away automatically by the whole system. And they can't identify that. And that's one of the, I've been studying the militia movement recently, and this is, I think, a really serious, although they're on the right track about a lot of things, they're understanding their things wrong and so on, but I believe that that's their misunderstanding
They're manipulated into emotional sidetracks that miss the key issues.
Well, there are some serious issues of lack of freedoms and so on, but this overemphasis on some petty individual freedoms, I think in our society has really distanced us, has pushed us to a misunderstanding of the importance
The
of
lack of
cooperation.
understanding
Right.
is encouraged, though.
We don't have, since there's no focus whatsoever on the rights of a community to have, a stable community and to keep the environment clean and whatever, and since there's all this focus on individualism, the individuals with the most power, of course, then end up actually taking the rights
Every
of
culture is
That's right.
being devoured by free enterprise.
Right.
Can you sum this up for us, Frank?
Well, I'd just like to make a comment and let that be my summary about what Kate was saying. People who are concerned about democracy and freedom might well consider that probably in the most important aspect, one of the most important aspects of their life, how they make a living. They live in a total autocracy. Any shop, any office is a dictatorship, where you have a boss and you do as you're told, or that's the end of it. You're out in the cold and you can go hungry. And anybody that thinks that that you can have a real democracy in that kind of a economic system is not thinking very clearly.
And then furthermore, those same corporations that you're employed by then are able, through their vast wealth, to control the government that is even ostensibly a democracy.
Well, as Mark said, the executive of the modern state is merely a committee of the ruling class. As Mark said, money is the universal, self-constituted value of all things. It has therefore robbed the whole world, human as well as natural, of its own value. Money is the alienated essence of human work and being. This alien essence dominates him, and he adores it. And this has been Say Can You S.E.E., the
Once monthly live show.
Yes, in Holland. We'll be coming here once a month, so get your telephones ready.
Once a week in rerun here in Holland, by the way. Normally produced in Grand Rapids. And imagine a country where 1 out of every 4 children is born in